I didn't know my life was about to split into a before and an after until I heard my husband say it. Flat, irritated, like he was commenting on the weather. He's not our problem, Maya. Not our problem. He was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, watching my little nephew cling to my leg like I was the only solid thing in his world. Oliver was 3. He'd arrived at our door with 2 garbage bags of clothes and a stuffed dinosaur that looked older than he did. And for 6 weeks, I tried to make my home feel safe for him. I tried to make my marriage feel safe for me. But the worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It wasn't the daycare drop-offs, the bath time battles, the tiny shoes that kept appearing in the middle of the living room like landmines. I could handle all of that. The worst part was the way my husband, Ethan, 29, learned to live like Oliver didn't exist. At first, it was subtle, a closed office door, dinner eaten alone, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then it became comments sharp enough to cut. When Oliver spilled juice, Ethan didn't even look at him. He looked at me and muttered, "This is exactly why we said no kids." When Oliver woke crying in the night, screaming for a mother who wasn't coming, Ethan rolled over in bed and said, "Can you do something about the noise?" The morning I heard Ethan tell his parents on the phone, "Everything's fine, it's not a big deal," something in my chest went cold. Because it was a big deal. A child was unraveling in my spare bedroom, and my husband was acting like empathy was optional. I called Ethan's mom later, my voice shaking, hands still damp from washing a small dinosaur cup, and told her the truth. And that's when everything exploded. That night, Ethan came home furious, eyes bright with a kind of anger I'd never seen in him. "You made me look like a villain," he said. I stared at him and realized I didn't recognize my own husband anymore. And the terrifying thought whispered through me, if he can be this cold to a terrified toddler, what happens when life gets hard for me? I'm Maya Tran. I'm 32, and for most of my adult life, I've been the steady one, the woman people call when their car breaks down, when rent is due, when someone needs a plan and not a pep talk. I work in operations for a healthcare logistics company. It's not glamorous, but it's structured. Schedules, systems, predictability. The kind of work where you learn to anticipate problems before they happen, because once they happen, it's already too late. That's probably why I loved Ethan. He was calmer than me in a way that felt like peace. An analyst who worked mostly from home, headphones on, spreadsheets open, the kind of man who could sit quietly beside you and make the room feel less noisy. We met 6 years ago at a friend's game night, one of those cramped apartments where the air smells like popcorn and cheap candles, and everyone pretends they're not trying to impress anyone. Ethan laughed at my sarcasm. I noticed he listened more than he talked. When he asked me out, he didn't do the whole charming performance thing. He just said, "I'd like to see you again. Just you, no crowd." Our relationship felt clean, no mess, no chaos. And early on, we had one conversation that became the backbone of everything: kids. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight. It was one of those rare, simple agreements people assume will never be tested. "I don't want them," I told him on a rainy Tuesday, sitting in my car after dinner because I wasn't ready to go back inside. "Not now, not ever." Ethan exhaled like I had just unhooked a weight from his chest. "Me neither." We said it again before we moved in together, again before we got engaged, again before the wedding, like signing our names at the bottom of an invisible contract. No kids, non-negotiable, a quiet life. That was our thing, our dream. Saturday mornings that belonged to us. Travel that didn't require strollers and snacks and meltdowns. A home that stayed clean for more than 10 minutes. And then there was my sister. My sister's name is Kylie. She's 26, 5 years younger than me, and she has always been the storm. Growing up, I was the one who did homework at the kitchen table. Kylie was the one who climbed the fence to sneak out and then cried in the bathroom when Mom yelled. She was impulsive, bright, reckless, someone who could be magnetic and exhausting in the same breath. She dropped out of college twice. She bounced between jobs like they were stepping stones across a river she couldn't quite cross. She fell in love fast, and when she fell hard, usually into men who treated her like a temporary hobby. Our parents tried everything. Advice, tough love, money, more advice. Kylie always said, "I've got it," even when she clearly didn't. 3 years ago, she had a baby boy, Oliver. The father disappeared when Kylie was 6 months pregnant. One day he was there, making promises with his hands on her belly. The next day, his phone was disconnected, and the only thing he left behind was a last name Oliver would never use. For a while, Kylie really did try. She worked at a call center, moved into a small apartment, and acted like motherhood would anchor her. But anchors don't work if you keep cutting the rope. About a year after Oliver was born, Kylie started using. First pills, then harder things. Our parents didn't know at first. They live in Arizona now because my dad's health is fragile. Diabetes, heart issues, hospital visits that come like unwanted holidays. My mom is his full-time caregiver. Their lives revolve around medication schedules and doctor appointments and the constant fear of the next emergency. When they finally realized what Kylie was doing, it was already bad. They begged her to go to treatment. Kylie swore she could handle it alone. 6 months ago, the bottom fell out. A neighbor heard Oliver crying for hours and called CPS. By the time a social worker showed up, Kylie was passed out on the couch. The apartment was filthy. No food. Oliver in a dirty diaper, eyes too quiet for a 3-year-old. CPS took him that day. Kylie was arrested that same day. And then the call came to me, because when you're the steady one, the world assumes you'll hold everything up. When CPS called, I was sitting at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet that suddenly felt meaningless. The social worker's voice was calm, practiced. "You're Oliver's closest eligible relative," she said. "If no family member takes him, he'll be placed in foster care. This would likely be temporary, 3 to 4 months. Possibly 6 if your sister's treatment takes longer." Temporary. That word became the rope I clung to. 3 to 6 months. Not forever, not adoption, not rewriting my entire life. Just stepping in. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night across from Ethan. The overhead light made shadows under his eyes. I explained everything. Kylie's arrest, our parents being medically ineligible, the possibility of strangers raising my nephew. I didn't demand. I didn't assume. "I need to know what you think," I said softly. "If we don't do this, he goes into the system." Ethan was quiet for a long time. He stared at the table, jaw tight. "How long?" he finally asked. 3 to 4 months, maybe 6. He nodded slowly. "And then he goes back to Kylie?" "If she completes treatment." Silence again. I could see the war happening inside him. The promise we made. The life we built. The clean, quiet house. Finally, he said, "It's family. We can't let him go to strangers." Relief flooded me so fast it made me dizzy. "I'll handle most of it," I added quickly. "Daycare, meals, routine. I won't let it take over everything." He gave a small, tight smile. "We'll figure it out." 3 weeks later, Oliver stood in our doorway clutching that stuffed dinosaur like it was oxygen. He was smaller than I remembered, quieter. He didn't cry when the social worker left. He just watched her car disappear and then looked up at me like he was trying to decide if I would disappear too. The first 2 weeks were manageable. I took time off work to help him adjust. We set up the spare bedroom with a toddler bed, soft blankets, dinosaur sheets. I enrolled him in daycare down the street. I made a schedule because schedules make me feel in control. Ethan worked from the home office. At first he tried. He'd step out and say, "Hey buddy," with an awkward smile. He'd ask Oliver, "Did you have a good day?" Then retreat back into the office before the answer fully formed. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't hostility either. I told myself adjustment takes time. Then the shifts began. Small things. Ethan started eating dinner in his office instead of at the table. At first he said he had late meetings. Then he stopped explaining. When Oliver laughed too loudly at a cartoon, Ethan would close the office door harder than necessary. On weekends, Ethan began running errands for hours. Grocery runs that lasted all afternoon. Coffee with friends that stretched into dinner time. One evening, after Oliver was asleep, I leaned against the bedroom door and asked gently, "Are you okay?" Ethan didn't look at me. "I never signed up for this." The words were quiet, but sharp. "You said yes," I reminded him. He exhaled sharply. Because what was I supposed to say? No? Let the kid go to foster care so I can keep my quiet house? I felt something sink inside me. "I asked you," I said. "You had a choice." He shook his head. "Not really." After that, the atmosphere in our home changed. Oliver spilled juice one morning, and Ethan muttered, "This is exactly why we said no kids." Oliver had nightmares, waking up crying for his mother. I would sit beside him in the dark, his small fingers tangled in my sleeve, whispering, "I'm here, I'm here." The next morning, Ethan said, "I can't function without sleep. Can you do something about it?" Do something. As if trauma were a light switch. The worst part wasn't what he said. It was the way he looked at Oliver, not with anger, but with detachment, like he was an inconvenience, like he was a disruption to be tolerated. And then one night, I overheard Ethan telling his parents on the phone, "It's fine. He's adjusting. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. That's when the first real crack formed inside me, because to me, it was everything. And I was starting to realize Ethan and I weren't standing on the same side anymore. 6 weeks. That's how long it took for the fragile balance in our house to collapse. Oliver had started having nightmares almost every night, the kind that ripped him out of sleep, disoriented and terrified. He'd wake up screaming for Kylie, his voice raw, confused, like he couldn't understand why she wasn't coming. The first time it happened, I ran down the hallway barefoot, heart pounding. He was sitting upright in bed, dinosaur clutched to his chest, eyes wide and unfocused. "Mommy," he sobbed. I gathered him into my arms. "I know," I whispered, rocking him gently. "I know, sweetheart. I'm here." He fell asleep against my shoulder, small breaths warm against my neck. It happened again the next night, and the next. One night, it happened 3 times. By the 3rd time, I could feel exhaustion pressing against my bones. But I stayed. I always stayed. When I finally crawled back into bed near dawn, Ethan was awake, staring at the ceiling. "I can't keep doing this," he said flatly. "He's 3, Ethan," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "He's traumatized." Ethan turned toward me, frustration flashing across his face. "And what about us? What about my sleep, my work, my life?" I stared at him. "Your life?" I repeated softly. "Yes," he said. "This isn't what we agreed to." Something inside me tightened. "We agreed to help family. We agreed to be child-free," he shot back. "You knew that." "I told you it was temporary." "You said that," he corrected. "That doesn't make it feel temporary." The next morning, he barely spoke to me. That weekend, his parents called. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when Ethan answered. I could hear his voice drifting down the hallway. "It's fine, Mom. Really, it's not that big of a deal." My hand stilled in the sink. He laughed lightly, like this was an amusing inconvenience, like Oliver wasn't crying himself to sleep every night, like I wasn't carrying the emotional weight of 2 households on my back. When he hung up, I dried my hands slowly. "Why did you lie?" I asked. He frowned. "About what?" "You told them everything's fine." "It's not their business," he said. "Why would I drag them into this?" "They care about us." "It's temporary," he repeated. "There's nothing to talk about." But it didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt like a dividing line. That night, Ethan moved into the guest bedroom for better sleep. We stopped eating together. Conversations shrank to logistics. Bills, groceries, daycare pickup times. I felt like I was living with a polite stranger. And then I made the decision that changed everything. 2 days later, Ethan's mom called while he was in the shower. She'd tried his phone and couldn't reach him. "How are things really going?" she asked gently. I hadn't planned to say anything, but I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of swallowing the hurt. Tired of feeling like I was the only adult in the room. So I told her the truth. I told her about the comments, about the eye rolls, about the nights I spent alone in Oliver's room while Ethan slept down the hall. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't accuse. I just told her what was happening. She was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I'll talk to him." That evening, Ethan came home furious. "My mom called me crying," he said, not even taking off his shoes. "She said she's disappointed in me." He looked at me like I'd betrayed him. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." "You had no right to air our private business to my parents," he snapped. I didn't lie. "You made me look heartless." I felt something snap inside my chest. "I didn't make you look like anything," I said quietly. "I described what you've been doing." We stood there in this living room, the silence between us heavier than any argument. For 3 days we didn't speak. We moved around each other like ghosts. I slept on the couch because I couldn't bear the distance of separate rooms and separate hearts. Oliver started asking me questions. "Why doesn't Uncle Ethan play with me?" The words hit harder than any accusation. I didn't know how to answer. On the 4th day, I called my mom. "I need you to take him sooner," I whispered after Oliver fell asleep. Our house had become toxic. Even a 3-year-old could feel it. 2 weeks later, my mom flew in. The morning Oliver left, he hugged me tight at the door. "When I see you again?" he asked. "Soon," I promised, my throat burning. Ethan stood in the hallway watching. He didn't say goodbye. After the car pulled away, I turned to him. "You're heartless," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "I did what I agreed to," he replied coolly. "He stayed here. That was the deal. Anything beyond that wasn't my responsibility." Not my responsibility. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a child. It was about who Ethan was when kindness required effort. And I didn't know if I could unsee it. After Oliver left, the house became quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful quiet Ethan and I used to love. It was hollow. His small shoes were gone from the hallway. The dinosaur sheets were stripped from the bed. The spare room looked like a hotel room again. Blank, neutral, erased. I stood in the doorway that first night and felt something twist in my chest. For 6 weeks, I'd been exhausted. Now I couldn't sleep. Ethan and I barely spoke. He left for the office in the mornings before I finished making coffee. I worked from home most days, but I kept the door closed. When he returned in the evening, he'd sit in the living room watching TV like nothing had happened, like a storm hadn't just torn through our marriage. After 2 weeks of this silence, I decided to try. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I wanted to see if there was still something left to salvage. One Saturday morning, I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, the kind of normal domestic gesture that used to mean something between us. "Can we talk?" I asked gently. Ethan sat down, arms crossed. I took a breath. "I'm sorry for calling your mom." His eyes flickered, surprise maybe. "I shouldn't have unloaded on her like that. I was overwhelmed. I needed someone to talk to." He nodded once. "Okay." That was it. No apology from him. No acknowledgement of the comments. No regret about how he treated Oliver. I swallowed. "Do you have anything you want to say about the past 2 months?" "No," he replied calmly. "Do you regret how things went?" He looked at me like I was asking something unreasonable. I didn't do anything wrong. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. "You avoided him. You rolled your eyes. You made comments." "I never treated him badly," Ethan said flatly. "I stayed out of the way. That was better than pretending." "Pretending?" I echoed. "I didn't want this, Maya. I agreed because I felt cornered." "You weren't cornered," I said, my voice steady but low. "I asked you." He shook his head. "When you frame it as, if we don't do this, he goes into foster care, what kind of person says no? You made it impossible." That hit harder than anything else. "I trusted you to be honest with me," I whispered. "I was honest," he said. "I told you I didn't want kids. You knew that." This wasn't about wanting kids. It was about helping a child in crisis. It was about breaking the one agreement our marriage was built on. Silence fell between us. For the first time, I realized we were arguing about two completely different things. To me, this had been about compassion. To him, it had been about a contract. He stood up after a moment. "I have brunch with friends," he said, as if the conversation had reached its natural end. I sat at the table long after he left, staring at the food neither of us touched. And the question wouldn't stop looping in my mind. If this is who he is when something unexpected happens, what does that mean for the rest of our lives? That Monday, I took the day off work. I walked through the house slowly. The guest bedroom, the kitchen floor where Oliver spilled juice, the couch where I'd slept during our silent war. I replayed everything. The eye rolls, the not my responsibility, the way he didn't even say goodbye. I wasn't grieving the chaos. I was grieving the version of Ethan I thought I married. That night, when he came home, I didn't ease into it. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed. "We already did." "No," I replied quietly. "We avoided the real part." He leaned against the wall, tired. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to acknowledge that how you handled this hurt me and hurt Oliver." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not apologizing for something I don't believe was wrong. It's not about blame," I said. "It's about whether we can understand each other." "Maybe we don't anymore," he said softly. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded resigned. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "I'm saying I'm not going to keep having the same fight over something that's over." Over. That word felt final. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Ethan left without saying goodbye. I packed a bag. I didn't leave a note. I didn't text him. I just checked into a small hotel a few miles away and turned off my phone. For 3 days, I sat alone with my thoughts. And when I finally turned my phone back on, there were no missed calls, no texts. No, "Are you okay?" Nothing. That silence told me more than any argument ever could. When I turned my phone back on after 3 days in that hotel room, I stared at the blank notification screen for a long time. No missed calls. No texts. No, "Where are you?" No, "Are you okay?" 3 days. A married woman disappears, and her husband assumes she'll come back when she's ready. That was the moment something shifted from hurt to clarity. When I returned home, Ethan was sitting on the couch watching television, volume low, posture relaxed. "Did you notice I was gone?" I asked, standing in the doorway with my overnight bag still in my hand. He glanced at me, almost mildly. "Yeah." "And you didn't think to check on me?" He shrugged. "I figured you needed space." I studied his face, calm, unbothered. "Most couples call," I said quietly, "just to make sure the other person is alive." "It wasn't that serious," he replied. That sentence landed like a verdict. It wasn't that serious. Not the child, not the fight, not my disappearance. Nothing was serious enough to disturb his equilibrium. That night, I told him I wanted to end our marriage. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. "I can't stay in a marriage where you don't care enough to check if I'm okay." Ethan sat up straighter, irritation flickering across his face. You're being dramatic. No, I said, I'm being clear. He stood, pacing once across the living room. This is about Oliver, he said. You're blowing up our entire life over something temporary that's already over. It's not about Oliver anymore, I replied. It's about how you treated him and how you treated me. He ran a hand through his hair. I let him stay. That's what you asked for. Let him stay? I repeated softly, like he was a guest who overstayed his welcome. You promised it was temporary, and you promised we'd handle things together. The argument stretched late into the night, not explosive, just exhausting. By morning, something in both of us had gone still. Over the next week, everything felt mechanical. We divided furniture like roommates ending a lease. He kept the bedroom set. I took the living room couch. We agreed to sell the house and split everything evenly. No screaming, no begging. Just paperwork. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. When the papers were delivered to him at work, he called that night. Are you really doing this? He asked. Yes. Why are you in such a rush? There's nothing left to save. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm disappointed, he said finally, but I won't fight it. And that was it. No fight, no attempt to fix anything. Just acceptance. I moved in with a friend temporarily. Then, a few weeks later, I flew to Arizona to stay with my parents. My dad's health had stabilized slightly with new medication. My mom sounded less tired when she called, and Oliver, sweet, quiet Oliver, was enrolled in preschool and slowly adjusting. The first afternoon I saw him again, he ran toward me in the backyard, dinosaur in hand. Maya, he shouted. He didn't hesitate. He didn't question whether I'd disappear again. He just trusted. I knelt and held him tighter than I meant to. That evening, sitting at my parents' kitchen table, my mom asked gently, Are you okay? I think so, I said. But the truth was more complicated. I wasn't devastated about losing Ethan. I was devastated about what I had misunderstood. I thought I married a man who valued kindness. Instead, I married a man who valued stability more than compassion. And I didn't know that until something tested us. My dad said something that night that stayed with me. People show you who they are when things get hard, he told me, not when everything's comfortable. I thought about the nights Oliver cried, about the hallway argument, about the silence when I disappeared. And I knew my father was right. The house sold within a month. We split the money evenly. No alimony, no legal drama. It was the cleanest ending I'd ever seen. Almost too clean. Back in Arizona, I started working remotely full-time. I used part of my share from the house to start consulting on the side, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had the courage for. Life became simpler. Morning walks with my dad. Afternoons at the park with Oliver. Evenings at the kitchen table with my mom cooking and the TV humming softly in the background. The tension that used to sit in my chest like a weight slowly lifted. A mutual friend texted me one night. I saw Ethan at a party, she wrote. He seemed fine, laughing, like nothing happened. I wasn't surprised. Ethan was good at compartmentalizing. He probably told himself our marriage ended because I was emotional, because I overreacted, because I chose chaos over peace. But here's what I realized. Peace without empathy isn't peace. It's avoidance. And the escalation didn't stop there. Because just when I thought my story with Ethan was finished, I learned something that reframed everything. Something that proved this had never only been about Oliver. And when I heard it, I felt something colder than anger. I felt clarity. People assume the darkest moment in a story like mine is the divorce. The signing of papers, the empty house, the quiet after the arguments. But that wasn't my lowest point. My lowest point was the doubt. It happened about a month after I moved to Arizona. The house sale was finalized. The money was in my account. Ethan and I hadn't spoken outside of brief lawyer emails. On the surface, everything was resolved. But inside me, something kept whispering. What if you overreacted? I'd be standing in my parents' kitchen, washing dishes beside my mom, and suddenly I'd wonder, was I too rigid, too sensitive? Did I expect too much? Ethan never yelled. He never cheated. He never insulted Oliver directly. He just withdrew. And I kept replaying that. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe I should have protected our marriage better. Maybe I made him the villain because I needed someone to blame. One afternoon, Oliver was napping and I was sitting alone in the backyard. The Arizona air was dry and still, cicadas humming faintly in the distance. I opened my phone and scrolled through old photos. Ethan and me at the beach, at our wedding, laughing over coffee. He had loved me. I knew he had. So how did we go from that to strangers dividing furniture? That night I couldn't sleep. The doubt was loud. I picked up my phone. I didn't call him, but I stared at his contact name for a long time. Just one message, I thought, just to see if there's anything left. Then I remembered the hotel. 3 days. No call, no text, no concern. I put the phone down. The next morning, my mom found me quiet at breakfast. You're somewhere else, she said gently. I don't know if I did the right thing, I admitted. She didn't rush to comfort me. She just listened. I keep thinking, what if I destroyed something good over one bad season? My mom folded her hands on the table. Maya, she said softly, did you leave because of one bad moment? Or because of a pattern? I didn't answer immediately. She continued. When Oliver cried at night, who got up? I did. When you disappeared for 3 days, who checked on you? Silence. And when you asked for acknowledgement, just acknowledgement, what did he give you? I felt tears prick my eyes. Nothing. My mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You didn't leave because he didn't want children, she said. You left because he didn't want to care. That word hit differently. Care. Not obligation, not agreement, not tolerance. Care. Later that afternoon, I took Oliver to the park. He was pushing a plastic truck through the sand, narrating an entire imaginary storyline under his breath. At one point, he looked up at me and asked, You staying? It was such a simple question. 3 words, but they carried weight. Yes, I said immediately. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his truck. And in that moment, I realized something that cut through the doubt. The lowest point of my marriage wasn't the arguments. It was the realization that if life ever required me to choose between comfort and compassion, Ethan would choose comfort, and I would choose compassion. That difference doesn't scream. It doesn't explode. It erodes, slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left to stand on. That night, I deleted Ethan's number. Not in anger. Not dramatically. Just decisively. The dark moment wasn't losing him. It was accepting that the man I thought I married didn't exist the way I believed he did. And once I truly accepted that, the grief softened, but clarity sharpened. Because what I learned next would prove that this fracture in our marriage had started long before Oliver ever stepped into our house. The turning point didn't come in a dramatic confession. It came in a quiet, uncomfortable conversation with someone who had no reason to lie to me. 2 months after I moved to Arizona, Ethan's older sister, Lila, called me. We'd always gotten along. Not best friends, but respectful. She was direct, perceptive, the kind of woman who noticed what others missed. I hope it's okay that I'm calling, she said. It's fine, I replied carefully. There was a pause. I've been thinking about you, she said, and about what happened. My stomach tightened. I don't want to reopen wounds, she continued, but I feel like you deserve to know something. Silence stretched between us. Know what? She exhaled slowly. Ethan's been saying for a while that he felt like he was competing. Competing? I repeated. With your family, she clarified. With the chaos. With the responsibility. He used to say you were always bracing for the next emergency. I leaned back in my chair. He knew who I was when he married me, I said quietly. I know, she replied. But I think he thought marriage would simplify things. That once you built your own life together, the outside noise would fade. The outside noise. My sister's addiction. My father's health. My instinct to show up when things fell apart. Did he say that? I asked. Yes, she said softly. And when Oliver moved in, I think it confirmed something he was afraid of. What? That your loyalty to your family would always outweigh your loyalty to him. The words landed heavy, but not surprising. I closed my eyes. He thought I chose Oliver over him, I said slowly. Lila hesitated. He said it felt like you did. I sat there for a long moment, absorbing that, because in Ethan's mind, this wasn't about compassion. It was about hierarchy, about priority, about him not being first. Did he ever say he regretted how he handled it? I asked. Lila was quiet. He said he did what he had to do to protect the life he wanted. Protect the life he wanted. There it was. Not our life. His. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. For weeks, I'd been asking myself if I overreacted, if I demanded too much, if I broke something good. But hearing that, it reframed everything. Ethan hadn't shut down because he was overwhelmed. He shut down because he felt threatened. Threatened by a 3-year-old who needed me. Threatened by the possibility that my instinct to care didn't revolve around him. And suddenly, all the pieces aligned. The I never signed up for this. The you made it impossible to say no. The silence when I disappeared. It wasn't indifference. It was resentment. Resentment that he wasn't the center of my world when crisis struck. And I realized something else, something sharper. If one temporary situation shook him this much, what would happen in 10 years? If my parents needed more care? If Kylie relapsed? If something happened to me? Would he withdraw every time life got complicated? That night, I didn't feel anger. I felt certainty. The next morning, I transferred the remaining joint account funds fully into my personal account, finalized the last legal paperwork, and signed the final settlement without hesitation. When the divorce became official, I didn't cry. I walked outside, breathed in the dry Arizona air, and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I hated him, but because I no longer doubted myself. Later that afternoon, Oliver and I were building a block tower on the living room floor. He handed me a red block. "You help?" he asked. "Always," I replied. And I meant it. The turning point wasn't revenge. It wasn't public humiliation. It wasn't Ethan's downfall. It was me realizing I didn't need him to understand my choice for it to be right. I didn't need validation from someone who measured love by convenience. I needed alignment, and we didn't have it. For the first time in months, I wasn't torn between two versions of my life. I was standing firmly in one. The fallout didn't look dramatic from the outside. No screaming matches, no public scandals, no social media wars. But consequences have a way of unfolding slowly, like cracks spreading through glass long after the initial impact. The first ripple came through mutual friends. A week after the divorce finalized, one of our close friends, Hannah, called me. "I didn't know things were that bad," she said carefully. "They weren't loud," I replied, "just misaligned." She hesitated. "Ethan's been telling people that you chose chaos over stability." I almost smiled at that. "That sounds like him. He says he couldn't compete with your family, that he felt like he was losing you." I thought about that for a moment. "I was never something to compete for," I said quietly. "I was someone to stand beside." Hannah was silent. "I think people are starting to see it," she admitted. "At first they thought you overreacted, but the more he talks, the more rigid it sounds." Rigid. That word felt accurate. Because the truth was this: when you leave calmly, with dignity, without slander, people eventually fill in the gaps themselves. Ethan didn't spiral. He didn't crash. He continued his life. But something shifted in how people saw him. His mother stopped defending him publicly. She and I still exchanged occasional polite messages about my dad's health. She never criticized him, but she also never implied I'd been wrong. That silence said enough. Lila texted me once. I wish he had been braver. Braver, not kinder, not more loving. Braver, because empathy requires courage, and Ethan had chosen safety. Meanwhile, my own life began to rearrange itself. The consulting work I'd started as a side project gained traction. I signed 3 clients within 2 months. The flexibility allowed me to spend more time with my parents and with Oliver. Kylie completed her treatment program and moved into a sober living house. She started supervised visits with Oliver. The first time she saw him again, she broke down in tears. "I'm sorry," she kept whispering, holding his small face in her hands. Oliver didn't fully understand addiction. He just hugged her. And I watched from a distance, feeling something complicated. Hope mixed with caution. One evening, after Oliver went to bed, Kylie sat at the kitchen table with me. "I heard about you and Ethan," she said quietly. "Yeah, I'm sorry," she added. "For what?" "For being part of the reason." I looked at her carefully. "You're not the reason," I said. "You were the catalyst." She frowned slightly. "If our marriage couldn't survive helping you," I continued, "it wouldn't have survived anything hard." That was the truth I'd come to accept. Fallout isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's exposure. The exposure of values, of priorities, of character. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Ethan had started dating someone new, someone younger, someone without family complications. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt recognition. He was building the life he always wanted. Simpler, controlled, predictable. And for him, that might truly be happiness. But here's what no one sees in the aftermath of a divorce like ours. The internal recalibration. The way your nervous system slowly unwinds. The way your body stops bracing for tension that never quite erupts. The way laughter returns, not loud, but natural. One afternoon, my dad and I were walking slowly around the block, his pace steady but careful. "You don't look heavy anymore," he said suddenly. "Heavy?" "In your shoulders," he clarified. "You used to carry things like armor." I thought about that. Maybe I had. Armor built from responsibility, from being the stable one. But I wasn't armored now. I was open. And opening yourself after something breaks, that's its own kind of strength. Ethan and I finalized everything without court battles. The house sale was clean. The accounts divided evenly. No alimony, no legal drama. On paper, it looked like 2 rational adults ending a compatible marriage. But compatibility isn't built on comfort alone. It's built on shared values when comfort disappears. The real fallout wasn't Ethan losing friends or reputation. It was this. He lost someone who would have stood beside him in any crisis. And I lost someone who would have stood beside me only when it was convenient. And when you strip away the noise, that's not equal loss. It's been almost a year since Oliver stood in my doorway with 2 garbage bags and a stuffed dinosaur. Almost a year since my marriage unraveled. Not because of betrayal or cruelty, but because of something subtler. Because of values that didn't align when tested. Today, my life looks different than it did 12 months ago. I live in a small rental house near my parents. My consulting business is steady. I wake up without tension sitting in my chest. I drink coffee slowly instead of rushing through mornings. I help Oliver with preschool crafts when Kylie's at meetings. I walk with my dad in the evenings and listen to my mom hum while she cooks. It's not glamorous, but it's grounded. Kylie is still in recovery. Some days are strong. Some days are fragile. I don't romanticize it. I just show up when needed. Oliver laughs more now, sleeps better. He still asks questions sometimes about where he lived before, about why grown-ups make confusing choices. I answer gently. And as for Ethan, I don't think about him often anymore. When I do, I don't feel anger. I don't feel regret. I feel understanding. We wanted different versions of safety. He wanted predictability. I wanted compassion. Neither of us was evil. But only one of those survives when life gets messy. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't measure a relationship by how it feels when everything is smooth. You measure it by who stands steady when the ground shakes. And here's the harder truth. You can't force someone to care about what you care about. You can't negotiate empathy. You can't convince someone to value what feels optional to them. Marriage isn't just about shared dreams. It's about shared reflexes. When crisis hits, do you move toward it together, or does one of you step back? I don't regret helping Oliver. I don't regret calling Ethan's mother. And I don't regret walking away when I realized I was standing alone. Sometimes the right choice doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet mornings, steady breath, and the absence of doubt. And that's enough for me.